The afternoon wind whipped across Dusty Point like a desperate animal, carrying red dust that settled on everything: the weathered storefronts, the horses tied at hitching posts, the few souls brave enough to venture outdoors. Eliza Mayfield sat just inside the doorway of her shop. Mayfield Stitchery, her needle moving in steady rhythm as she finished the last seam on a simple wedding dress. The fabric was cheap calico, but her stitches were as fine as any Eastern seamstress might produce. 2 years a widow. She'd learned that keeping her hands busy kept the memories at bay. The sun blazed overhead, turning the unpaved Main Street into a furnace. The air hung thick with the smell of tanned leather, horse sweat, and the ever-present dust that seemed to coat the inside of one's throat. The wooden sign above her door creaked on its hinges, the painted letters fading under the relentless New Mexico sun. Through her window, she could see the town's respectable women hurrying past, their eyes carefully averted from her shop. A widow who worked who refused to remarry or move in with relations was something to whisper about in Dusty Point. The thunder of hooves announced riders approaching from the north. Eliza didn't look up. Cattle drives came through regular enough, bringing cowboys hungry for civilization and trouble in equal measure. But these horses slowed at the edge of town, and she recognized the distinctive gait of the lead mount. Cole Hartley was back from the latest drive. Through her window, she watched him dismount outside the saloon. Trail dust covered him from hat to boots, and dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of too many nights sleeping under stars and watching for rustlers. Inside the saloon, she heard the usual calls. "Look who's back," the rancher's boy playing at being a real cowhand. Cole's father owned the largest spread in 3 counties, and folks never let the younger Hartley forget it. Eliza returned her attention to her work, checking the hem length one final time. Mrs. Morrison would collect the dress tomorrow for her daughter's wedding. Plain as it was, it would serve its purpose: respectability on a schoolteacher's budget. She was reaching for her scissors when she smelled the smoke. At first, just a hint of burning wood, different from the usual smell of cooking fires. Then stronger, sharper. Eliza stood, her heart suddenly pounding. Through the thin wall separating her shop from Murphy's feed store, she could hear crackling. The chimney, Murphy's ancient chimney with its cracked mortar and tilting stack. Smoke began seeping through the gaps in the wallboards. Eliza grabbed the wooden box containing her thread months of credit at the general store wound onto precious spools. She snatched the wedding dress and her account book, then hesitated. The Singer sewing machine sat in the corner, black iron gleaming despite its age. James had saved for 2 years to buy it for her, his last gift before the fever took him. The smoke thickened. She could hear shouting now, men running, but that machine, she couldn't let it burn. Dropping everything but the thread box, Eliza pulled her shawl over her nose and mouth and plunged back inside. The heat hit her like a physical blow. Flames were already licking through the wall, catching on the dry pine boards. The Singer sat there, impossibly heavy, impossibly precious. She grabbed the wheel, trying to drag it, but the smoke made her eyes stream. Her lungs burned. Strong hands suddenly gripped her shoulders, pulling her back. "Are you crazy?" a voice shouted. Cole Hartley pushed past her, his own bandana tied over his face. In one motion, he hefted the sewing machine, all 50 pounds of it, and staggered toward the door. Eliza grabbed the wooden base, helping guide him through the smoke. They burst into the afternoon air, both coughing violently. Cole set the machine down in the dust, then doubled over, hands on his knees. Eliza's eyes watered from smoke, she told herself, not from the unexpected kindness of a near stranger. "Thank you," she managed between coughs. He straightened, pulling down his bandana. For a moment, their eyes met his, the color of creek water, hers dark as coffee. No flirtation there, no conquest, just 2 people who touched the edge of loss and pulled back. The fire brigade, such as it was in Dusty Point, had formed a bucket line from the water trough. But the wind caught the flames, sending sparks onto Eliza's roof. Within minutes, half her shop was ablaze. By sunset, the fire was out, but the damage was done. The north wall of Mayfield's stitchery stood black and skeletal. The roof had partially collapsed. Eliza sat on her saved sewing machine, surrounded by the few bolts of fabric they'd managed to rescue, and surveyed the wreckage of her independence. Sheriff Pike ambled over. Notepad in hand, a thin man who always seemed to be looking past whoever he was talking to. Pike made a show of writing down details. "Looks like Murphy's chimney finally gave out," he said, not meeting Eliza's eyes. "These old buildings, fire hazard." "That chimney's been cracked for 2 years," Eliza said quietly. "I told the town council 3 times. Pike shrugged. "Well, nothing to be done now. You got somewhere to stay. Mrs. Mayfield." Before she could answer, Silas Dugan's voice cut through the evening air. "Terrible thing, just terrible." The cattle baron stood against a post, his black suit unmarred by dust or ash. He smiled, but it never reached his eyes. "I'd be happy to extend a loan for repairs. Mrs. Mayfield, very reasonable terms." Eliza knew those terms. Half the businesses in Dusty Point owed Dugan money, and he collected in more than cash. "Thank you, Mr. Dugan, but I'll manage." "Will you now?" His smile widened. "A woman alone, no roof over her business, winter's coming. Gets cold in New Mexico." "I said I'll manage." Cole stepped forward. "She's got help. I can get canvas from the ranch, some lumber, have a temporary roof up by week's end." Dugan's eyes narrowed. "That's so. And what's your interest here?" "Young Hartley." "Being neighborly," Cole said evenly. "Something you might try sometime." The 2 men stared at each other. Around them, the townsfolk pretended to be busy with the cleanup while watching every move. Widow Mayfield and the Hartley boy, the gossips would feast for weeks. Dugan finally laughed, a sound like gravel in a pan. "Neighborly, of course." He tipped his hat to Eliza. "My offer stands, Mrs. Mayfield, when you come to your senses." After he left, Eliza turned to Cole. "You don't owe me anything." "Nobody said anything about owing." He looked at the ruined shop. "I've got men who can help. We'll start tomorrow." "I can't pay." "Did I ask for pay?" He met her eyes again, and this time something flickered there. Respect, maybe understanding. "You saved that machine for a reason. Seems foolish to let it sit idle for want of a roof." The evening wind picked up, carrying the smell of char and defeat, but also, faintly, the scent of rain from the mountains. Hope, maybe, or just another desert illusion. "I cook a fair supper," Eliza said finally. "Nothing fancy, but if you're going to be working..." Cole's weathered face cracked into the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. "I've been eating trail beans for 3 weeks. Mrs. Mayfield. Anything cooked in a real kitchen sounds like heaven." As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Eliza looked at her salvaged possessions, the singer, the thread box, a few bolts of cloth. Not much to rebuild a life on. But then, she'd started with less when James died. And this time, maybe, she wouldn't be rebuilding alone. The coyotes began their evening chorus from the hills, their calls echoing across the desert. Dusty Point settled into another night, unaware that the fire had burned more than wood and fabric. It had burned through the careful boundaries that kept people in their proper places, setting the stage for a different kind of heat altogether. The morning after the fire dawned clear and merciless, the sun already burning hot by the time Cole arrived with 2 ranch hands and a wagon full of supplies. Eliza stood amid the ruins of her shop, having spent the night at Mrs. Olison's boarding house, too proud to show how little sleep she'd gotten. She watched Cole drive stakes into the ground, his movements efficient and purposeful. When he stretched the canvas between the posts, she found herself threading a heavy needle with waxed cord. "I can manage the sewing part," she said, kneeling beside the canvas edge. Cole glanced at her, noting the sure way her hands moved. "Backstitch." "Double backstitch. It'll hold against the wind." She demonstrated the technique, her needle moving in precise rhythm. Strange, how her trade could help rebuild her own shelter. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. As they worked, memories surfaced unbidden. James collapsing in the field, the fever that took him in 3 days despite all her prayers and cool cloths. The singer had arrived a week after the funeral ordered months before, a surprise he'd never seen her receive. For 2 years, that machine had been her anchor, each stitch a small defiance against grief. Cole, meanwhile, remembered his father's reaction when he'd announced he was joining the cattle drive. "Real men don't work for wages." The old man had said, "They own land, they own cattle, they own their fate." But Cole had seen what ownership did turned men hard as the land they claimed, measuring worth in head of cattle and acres fenced. "Heard about the railroad," Eliza said, breaking the silence. "They say it'll come through Dusty Point by spring." "Bringing civilization, according to the newspapers." Cole hammered another stake. "Course, they said that about the cattle drives too." "You don't sound convinced." He paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Railroad means more than goods and people. Means company stores, company prices. Means men like Dugan get richer while folks like—" He caught himself. "While folks like me get pushed out," Eliza finished calmly. "I know what people say. Mr. Hartley, widow should remarry or move back east. Shouldn't be running a business, competing with men who have families to feed." "That what you believe?" She looked up from her stitching. "I believe a person's got the right to work for their bread, man or woman. I believe these hands can sew a straighter seam than anyone in 3 counties, and that ought to count for something." Before Cole could respond, Reverend Alden appeared, his black coat dusty from the walk, a thin man with a face like sour milk. He surveyed the scene with obvious disapproval. "Mrs. Mayfield," he began, his voice carrying that particular tone reserved for wayward women. "I trust you're well after yesterday's unfortunate event." "Well enough, Reverend." "I've been thinking perhaps this is a sign. The Lord works in mysterious ways. Perhaps it's time to consider a more appropriate situation. My sister in Santa Fe takes in respectable widows." "I appreciate your concern." Eliza interrupted, her needle never pausing. "But I have work here. The railroad crew will need uniforms. 30 men, maybe more." The Reverend's lips pursed. "A woman alone, conducting business with rough men. It invites talk. Mrs. Mayfield invites worse than talk." Cole straightened from his work. "With respect, Reverend, seems to me Mrs. Mayfield's conducting business just fine, and she's not alone. She's got neighbors willing to help." "Neighbors?" The word dripped with implication. "Yes, I can see that." After the Reverend left, Eliza surprised herself by laughing a short, sharp sound. "He means well, I suppose. He means to see everyone in their proper place." Cole said, "His kind always do." By midday, they'd made progress on the temporary shelter. Word had spread, as word always did in Dusty Point. Some folks walked by, pretending business elsewhere while stealing glances. But something unexpected happened. Nora Oleson arrived with water and sandwiches, followed by 2 of her boarding house girls. "Figured you could use some help," Nora said simply. She was a tall Norwegian woman who'd buried 2 husbands and now ran the cleanest boarding house in the territory. Many hands make light work, right? Soon they had an efficient system, Cole and his men on construction, the women organizing the salvage goods and cleaning soot from the singer. Eliza felt something unknot in her chest. Not charity, these women understood the difference. This was solidarity. "Heard Dugan bought up all the fabric from Mendoza's last shipment," one of the girls mentioned casually, "storing it in his warehouse." Eliza's hands stilled. Without fabric, she couldn't fill orders. Without orders, she couldn't eat. All of it. Every bolt, paid cash, too. Mendoza couldn't refuse. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Dugan would wait until she was desperate, then offer to sell at triple the price. No doubt. Or perhaps he'd simply hold it until she agreed to his loan terms. That evening, Cole walked Eliza to the edge of town where the land rose slightly, offering a view of the valley. The grass was brown and sparse, scattered with devil's thorn that tumbled with each gust of wind. Above, a hawk circled lazily, hunting for prey among the rocks. See that gulch? Cole pointed to a dry wash cutting through the landscape. Come the rains, that'll run fast enough to drown a man, but right now, it's bone dry. Land out here, it's either too much or too little. Never just right. Why show me this? Because you need to know what you're up against. Not just Dugan this place. It'll kill you 9 ways before breakfast if you're not careful. That cactus there. He indicated a sprawling, prickly pear. Looks harmless enough, but the spines'll fester if you don't dig them all out. See how the bark's torn on that mesquite cattle thieves came through 2 nights back. Moving fast, probably hit the Benson spread. Eliza studied the signs he pointed out, filling away the knowledge. You're trying to scare me off. I'm trying to keep you alive. His voice was rough. You're not playing by the rules folks expect. That makes you a target. I've been a target since the day James died. She met his eyes steadily. I can handle talk. It won't stop at talk. That night proved him right. Someone or several someones had visited the salvaged fabric. Nothing stolen, but sticky pine pitch had been splashed across several bolts, ruining yards of material. Eliza discovered it at dawn, running her fingers over the destroyed cloth. She didn't cry, didn't rage. Instead, she heated water and began the tedious process of trying to save what she could. Cole found her there, scrubbing with lye soap until her hands were raw. This won't be the last of it, he said quietly. I know. She didn't look up. Doesn't matter. I've got orders to fill. With what fabric? She gestured to a small stack of salvaged pieces. I'll make do. Piece together scraps if I have to. Turn collars, mend tears, make something from nothing. It's what women do. Mr. Hartley, we make do. He watched her work, noting the determined set of her jaw, the steady movement of her hands despite the damage. His father would call her foolish, stubborn. Cole was beginning to think those might be the qualities that mattered most out here. There's a man in Las Cruces, he said finally. Deals in fabric. Owes me a favor from the last drive. It's 2 days' ride, but I can't pay for shipping. Who said anything about payment? He pulled on his gloves. I'm heading that way anyway. Ranch business. It was a lie, and they both knew it. But Eliza had learned when to accept help and when to preserve pride. This required both. I'd be grateful, she said simply. As Cole prepared to leave, Sheriff Pike appeared, notepad in hand. Heard about the vandalism? He said, not quite meeting anyone's eyes. Any idea who might have done it? You tell me. Sheriff, Eliza replied. You're the law in Dusty Point. Pike scribbled something meaningless. Without witnesses, not much I can do. Could have been anyone. Drifters. Maybe. Been a lot of strangers through town. Strangers who knew exactly where I stored my fabric. The sheriff's face reddened. Now, Mrs. Mayfield, I don't care for what you're implying. I'm not implying anything, she said evenly. Just observing that for strangers. They seemed mighty familiar with my business. After Pike left, Cole touched his hat brim. 2 days, he promised. Keep that Winchester handy. Eliza watched him ride out, then returned to her salvage work. The sun climbed higher, baking the earth until it cracked like broken promises. But she kept working, her needle moving in steady rhythm, stitching together more than fabric. With each careful seam, she was mending her place in this harsh land, one thread at a time, true to his word. Cole returned from Las Cruces with 3 bolts of fabric not the finest quality, but serviceable, More importantly, he brought allies. Nora Oleson had quietly spread word among the women, and by the week's end, Eliza's makeshift workshop hosted an unlikely gathering. Two of Nora's boarding house girls, the blacksmith's daughter, and even Mrs. Chen, whose husband ran the laundry. "I can cut fabric," offered Sarah, one of the boarding house girls. "Worked in a dress shop back in Missouri before." She didn't finish, but they all understood, before whatever had driven her to seek work in a frontier boarding house. Eliza organized them with the efficiency of a field general. "Mrs. Chen, your embroidery is the finest I've seen. Sarah and Jenny on cutting. Martha can work the buttonholes." She demonstrated the measurements for the railroad uniforms, careful to explain each step. "We've got 6 weeks, working together. We can manage it." The rhythm of shared labor filled the space, scissors sliding through cloth, the treadle's steady beat, needles pulling thread. Their hands moved in unconscious harmony, years of women's work flowing into common purpose. The singer hummed under Eliza's guidance while hand sewers worked on finishing touches. Cole arrived daily with small improvements: a better lamp, sturdy shelves, a lock for the door that actually held. He worked quietly, respectful of the women's space, but his presence had shifted something when Tom Bradley, one of Dugan's rougher hands, loitered too close to the shop. Cole simply stood and cleaned his rifle on the porch. Bradley found business elsewhere. 3 days into their work, the dust storm hit. It came from the west, a wall of yellow-brown that turned noon to twilight. The wind screamed like something alive and angry, driving grit through every crack and crevice. The women scrambled to cover the fabric, throwing sheets over the work tables. "The seams, Mrs. Chen cried. "They'll fill with dust." Eliza grabbed the finished pieces, shoving them into the one cabinet that still had solid doors. Cole and Sarah fought to secure the canvas walls, but the wind threatened to tear everything apart in the chaos. Eliza's hands found Cole's as they both reached for the same rope. For a moment, in the howling semi-darkness, they stood close enough to share breath. His fingers were rough but gentle as they briefly covered hers. "Inside," he shouted over the wind. "All of you." They huddled in Nora's boarding house while the storm raged. Through the walls, they could hear wood creaking, metal singing, the world reshaping itself. When it finally passed, Dusty Point looked like it had been beaten with a giant's fist. Dust drifts leaned against buildings. A wagon lay overturned in the main street. The workshop had survived, barely. But the well showed cracks, and when Cole hauled up the bucket, the water ran brown with silt. "It'll settle," he said, but Eliza heard the worry beneath his words. Water was life out here, more precious than gold. She surprised him then, producing a length of muslin. "From my petticoat," she said matter-of-factly. "We'll strain it through this. Let it sit in the sun. Used to do it when James and I first homesteaded." Working together, they rigged a filtration system, crude but functional. Another skill Cole hadn't expected from a town seamstress. But then Eliza Mayfield kept proving she was more than what she seemed. The sabotage escalated 2 nights later. Jenny stumbled in at dawn, white-faced. The fabric shipment from Las Cruces, someone got to it. They found the bolts slashed, sticky pine resin poured over the cuts. Worse, several completed uniforms had been taken from the drying line and trampled in the mud. The message was clear: stop, or it gets worse. Eliza stared at the destruction, her face carved from stone. Then, without a word, she began sorting through the damage. "This piece here we can cut around the resin. These edges are clean. Jenny, bring me the scraps bin." "You can't be serious," Sarah breathed. "They'll just do it again. Then we'll fix it again." Eliza's voice was steady as her hands. "And again after that, if need be. They want us to quit. They'll have to do better than this." Cole had been examining the ground around the workshop. "Mrs. Mayfield," he called softly. She joined him, following his pointing finger, boot prints in the dust, one with a distinctive worn heel. A few threads caught on a splinter blue wool, like certain men favored for their work shirts. "You recognize it?" she asked. "Maybe. Can't prove anything, though." "Don't need to prove it. Just need to know who to watch." That afternoon, Eliza did something unexpected. She walked into the saloon, a respectable woman's reputation destroyed in one deliberate step. The conversation stopped as if cut by shears. She found Dugan at his usual table, counting money. "Mr. Dugan," she said clearly, "I believe you have something of mine." His smile was thin as paper. "Can't imagine what you mean, Mrs. Mayfield. Though I am surprised to see you here. This ain't a place for ladies." "Neither is having my property destroyed. Neither is being threatened for trying to make an honest living." She kept her voice level, but it carried to every corner of the room. "So, let me be clear. I will complete my contracts. I will run my business. And if your men come near my shop again, they'll find more than an old woman with a needle waiting for them." "That sounds like a threat." "It's a promise." She turned to address the room. "I pay fair wages for good work. Any man here has a woman who can sew. Send her to me. We'll split the profits honest." She left without waiting for an answer, but through the window, Cole saw something that made him smile. Two of the younger cowboys were already arguing with Dugan, gesturing toward the door Eliza had walked through. Money talked louder than loyalty in hard times. Sheriff Pike made his obligatory visit that evening, his discomfort obvious. "Mrs. Mayfield, you can't go making accusations without proof." "Did I mention any names, Sheriff?" She continued sewing, not bothering to look up. "I simply stated facts. My property was destroyed. I intend to continue working, that's all." Pike shifted his weight. "Dugan's not a man to cross. Neither am I a woman to bow down." Now she did look up, and Pike actually stepped back from what he saw in her eyes. "Will you do your job, Sheriff? Or should I write to the territorial governor about the state of law in Dusty Point?" After he left, Cole emerged from the back room where he'd been listening. "You've started something now." "Good." She bit off a thread with perhaps more force than necessary. "I'm tired of shadows and whispers. Let them come in daylight if they dare." But it was Nora who offered the most practical solution. "We organize," she said simply. "Not just for sewing, for everything. They cut one woman's cloth. We all stop washing their clothes. They threaten one of us. They threaten all." The Dusty Point Sewing Circle was born that night, though it was far more than its innocuous name suggested. Within a week, they had assistant lookouts during work hours, shared resources, information networks that rivaled anything the men had built. Cole watched it grow with something like awe, his whole life. He'd seen power flow from strength, money, land, but these women were building something different: power from solidarity, from skills dismissed as women's work turned into economic weapons. "You're smiling," Eliza observed one evening as they checked the newly reinforced door. "Just thinking how my father would react to all this. Women organizing, refusing to know their place." He shook his head. "He'd say the world's ending." "Maybe his world is," Eliza said quietly. "Maybe it's time." The next morning brought the best news: they'd had 12 uniforms completed, payment received in cash, real money, earned honest. Eliza divided it carefully among the workers, keeping the accounts transparent. For some of these women, it was the first money they'd ever earned that wasn't immediately owed to someone else. As the sun set over Dusty Point, painting the dust-hazed sky in shades of copper and blood, Eliza stood in her patched-together workshop and felt something she hadn't experienced in 2 years: hope. Not the fragile kind that broke at first touch, but the sturdy variety, sewn with strong thread and backed by willing hands. Cole found her there, ledger open, planning the next week's work. "You know, this is just the beginning," he said. "Dugan won't stop." "I know." She looked up at him. And for the first time, she smiled, really smiled. Not the polite expression she wore for customers. But neither will we. Outside, a coyote called to its pack, and others answered. The sound echoed across the desert, wild and free and utterly unafraid, in her workshop, surrounded by fabric and thread and the tools of her trade. Eliza Mayfield added her own voice to that chorus, quieter perhaps, but no less determined to be heard. The completed uniforms were loaded onto the railroad company's wagon just after dawn, each piece wrapped in brown paper that crinkled like autumn leaves. The foreman, a German named Holst, counted out the payment in gold coins that caught the early light, for the first time since James died. Eliza held enough money to pay off the singer's remaining debt and still have funds for next month's rent. "Good work," Holst said, examining the stitching on a jacket. "The boys from Chicago. They want another 30 uniforms. You can manage." 6 weeks for 30, Eliza replied, already calculating fabric needs and work hours. Same price per piece. He nodded and handed her a paper. Contract, official-like. But before the ink could dry on success, Dugan played his next card. A visit from town clerk Morrison brought the news a new business assessment fee for establishments on Main Street. The amount was precisely calculated to drain what she'd just earned. "Since when?" Eliza asked, though she knew the answer. Morrison, a nervous man who perpetually looked like he'd eaten something sour, wouldn't meet her eyes. "Council voted last night, Mr. Dugan pointed out that businesses benefit from town services." "What services?" "The sheriff, who won't investigate crimes. The fire brigade that arrived after my shop burned." "It's the law now. Mrs. Mayfield, due by month's end." Cole was replacing a board in the wall when Morrison scurried away. He'd heard everything. "How much does that leave you?" "Enough for thread. Not enough for fabric." She set the contract on her cutting table, smoothing it with hands that wanted to tremble. "Doesn't matter. I'll find a way." That Sunday, Reverend Alden chose his sermon carefully. He spoke of proper roles, of contentment with one's lot, of the dangers of pride. His eyes found Eliza throughout, sitting in the back pew between Nora and Mrs. Chen, when he intoned about unwomanly ambition and the corruption of gentle hearts. Several congregants turned to stare. Eliza sat through it all, back straight as a measuring stick. When the final hymn began, she stood and sang in her clear alto voice, every note a small rebellion. Some women looked away. Others, more than before, nodded slightly as she passed. Outside the church, Mary Patterson approached hesitantly. The banker's wife rarely acknowledged Eliza beyond the minimal politeness required. "Mrs. Mayfield," she said quietly, glancing around. "My daughter Elizabeth, she'd like to learn proper stitching. Would you consider—" "Tuesday afternoons," Eliza replied. "First lessons free." It was a crack in the social wall, tiny but significant, where Mary Patterson led. Others might follow. The afternoon brought Cole and Eliza to the edge of town, checking positions for water barrels. The landscape spread before them endless stretches of buffalo grass gone brown, scattered mesquite trees twisted by wind, mountains like broken teeth on the horizon. The sun was falling toward evening, painting everything in shades of amber and rust. Beautiful in its way, Cole said, surprising her. Most folks just see the harsh parts. Beauty and harshness aren't opposites out here. They're dance partners. Eliza shaded her eyes, studying the sky. Those clouds building to the west rain by Thursday. I'd wager you read weather now too. James taught me, said a woman alone needs to know when to cover the wood pile and when to set out water barrels. The mention of her husband came easier now, like touching a scar instead of a wound. Cole dismounted to examine a low spot where water might collect. Tell me about him, if you want. Eliza considered, then stepped down from her own mount He was a dreamer, thought he'd find silver in these hills, strike it rich. Instead, he found hard work and harder ground, but he never complained, never looked back east with regret, said freedom was worth more than comfort. Sounds like a wise man. Wise enough to marry a woman who spoke her mind and wouldn't simper. A small smile touched her lips. His mother was horrified, said he'd married a termagant who'd lead him to ruin. Did you? Led him to New Mexico. Anyway, some would call that the same thing. She paused, watching a hawk circle overhead. What about you? Why stay here when you could be anywhere? Cole picked up a handful of earth, letting it sift through his fingers. My father measures everything in acres and cattle. My mother, before she died, she saw differently. Used to say the land doesn't belong to us, we belong to it. I never understood until I spent nights under these stars, days reading the stories written in deer tracks and wind patterns. Your father doesn't appreciate poetry. My father doesn't appreciate anything that won't increase his holdings. The bitterness crept in despite his efforts. He's already got a wife picked out for me, Margaret Holbrook. Her daddy owns the bank and 3,000 acres of good grassland. Ah, Eliza's voice was carefully neutral. A good match? A business merger dressed in white lace. He stood, dusting his hands. But that's not we should head back. The ride back was quiet, each lost in thought. The sun dropped lower, stretching their shadows long across the desert floor. As they reached town, they saw Sheriff Pike leaving Dugan's office, tucking something into his vest pocket. Well, Cole said softly, that explains a few things. That night, Eliza opened her account books and faced reality. Even with the sewing circle's help, she couldn't fill the railroad order without fabric. The numbers didn't lie, no matter how many times she recalculated. Cole found her there an hour later, ledger still open, pencil worn down to a nub. How bad? Bad enough. She closed the book firmly. But I've been poor before. At least now I've got company in it. He pulled out a leather pouch, setting it on the table. Call it an investment. The ranch needs reliable suppliers for work clothes, blankets, that sort of thing. Cole. It's business. You'll pay it back with goods. His tone brooked no argument. Unless your pride's worth more than those women counting on wages. She wanted to refuse. Every fiber of proper behavior said she should. But Jenny's baby needed medicine, and Mrs. Chen's roof leaked, and pride was a luxury none of them could afford. I'll keep exact accounts, she said finally. Every penny. I know you will. They drew up terms by lamplight, careful to keep it professional despite the intimacy of the moment. When their hands brushed as she passed the pen, neither acknowledged it. But something had shifted between them, subtle as a change in wind direction. The next morning brought unexpected allies. 3 cowboys from the Diamond Bar Ranch appeared at her door, hats in hand. Our women heard about your circle, the eldest said. They want in. We're here to say we got no quarrel with it. Man's wife earns honest money. That's good for everybody. Word of the cowboys' visit spread faster than wildfire. By noon, 2 more ranches had sent representatives. Not all the men approved, plenty grumbled about proper places and natural order. But pragmatism won over philosophy when extra income was involved. Dugan's response was swift. The mysterious assessment fee doubled. When Eliza went to argue it at the council meeting, she found the doors locked, the meeting rescheduled without notice. Getting scared, Nora observed that evening as they sorted fabric. Scared men do stupid things. She was right. The stupidity came in the form of Tom Bradley, whiskey brave and mean, blocking Eliza's path as she walked home after dark. Think you're real clever, he slurred. Too good for regular folks. Need a lesson in manners. Eliza's hand found her scissors, the ones she always carried. Step aside, Mr. Bradley. Make me. He grabbed for her arm. The scissors flashed. A line of red appeared on Bradley's cheek, neat as a seam. He stumbled back, hand to his face. cursing. "Next one goes deeper," Eliza said evenly. "I've got a steady hand and good aim." Cole and Nora rounded the corner just as Bradley fled. They took in the scene, Eliza standing firm, scissors still in hand, a spot of blood on the dirt. "You all right?" Cole's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Fine, mister. Bradley just learned that seamstresses know how to use sharp objects." She slipped the scissors back into her pocket. "Though I suspect this won't be the end of it." She was right about that too, but as they walked her home, one on each side like an honor guard, Eliza felt the fear that had gripped her throat begin to loosen. She'd drawn blood to defend herself, crossed another line that couldn't be uncrossed. The stars were coming out, brilliant in the clear desert air. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new battles in this war of thread and determination. But tonight, she was still standing, still sewing, still refusing to be what they wanted her to be, a properly broken woman who knew her place. The sewing circle was more than fabric and thread now. It was a revolution, one careful stitch at a time. The night was moonless, wind scraping against the workshop walls like fingernails on silk. Cole had come to repair a leak in the roof, working by lantern light while Eliza sorted fabric below. She heard his sudden curse and the clatter of dropped tools. "Let me see," she said, climbing the ladder before he could protest. Blood welled from a gash on his palm where the sharp tin edge had caught him. Without thinking, she cradled his hand in both of hers, examining the wound by flickering light. "It needs cleaning and bandaging." Her voice was steady, professional, but something electric passed between them in the narrow space of the loft. His blood was warm on her fingers, his breathing audible in the darkness. She climbed down first, Cole following. At her work table, she lit another lamp and retrieved her sewing basket, not for thread this time, but for the clean linen strips she kept for emergencies. The desert taught harsh lessons about preparedness. "Hold still," she murmured, cleaning the wound with water and whiskey from the bottle Cole produced from his saddlebag. He didn't flinch, though it must have burned. She wrapped the linen carefully, each pass of the bandage deliberate and gentle. "You've done this before," he observed. "Ranch life teaches many skills." She tied off the bandage, but didn't immediately release his hand. They stood close in the lamplight, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his eyes, smell the leather and sage on his clothes. "Eliza," just her name, nothing more, but weighted with possibility. The moment stretched taut between them until Cole stepped back, breaking the spell. "I should go. It's late." "Yes." She busied herself putting away the supplies. "Thank you for fixing the roof." He paused at the door, silhouetted against the star-drunk sky. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he said the words that had been haunting them both. The seamstress stitched alone until the rancher's son sewed passion into her nights. The door closed before she could respond, leaving her alone with a racing heart and hands that trembled as they folded the unused bandages. The next evening, after the sewing circle had disbanded for the night, Cole returned. This time, he brought no tools, no excuse for the visit. They sat on the workshop steps, sharing bitter coffee and watching the stars emerge. "We need to set terms," Eliza said finally. "Clear boundaries. Like a business contract. Like two people who understand that survival comes before sentiment." She turned to face him. "I care for you, Cole, more than I should. But I won't be another scandal for this town to feast on, and I won't be the reason you lose your inheritance." "My inheritance?" He laughed, short and sharp. "Land and cattle and a name that comes with chains attached. Chains that feed people, that provide security." She touched his arm lightly. "I've been poor. Remember, romance doesn't fill empty bellies or mend leaking roofs." They talked through the night, setting their own laws. Affection expressed in small acts, not grand gestures. No meetings that couldn't be explained by business. Her door locked always for safety, but also for propriety. If they moved toward something more, it would be slowly, with intention. "Like sewing," Eliza said. "One stitch at a time, each one secure before the next." Dawn was breaking when Tom Bradley made his move, still bearing the mark of Eliza's scissors. He'd gathered liquid courage and a grudge. He jimmied the workshop's back window, intent on teaching a lesson to the woman who'd dared mark him. But Cole, sleepless and restless, had been walking the perimeter. The crash of breaking glass brought him running. He found Bradley inside, reaching for the bolts of fabric with oil-soaked rags. The fight was brief but vicious. Bradley had size and rage. Cole had sobriety and training. They crashed through Eliza's carefully organized workspace, scattering patterns and thread. A fist connected with Cole's jaw, sending him into the cutting table. He came up with the heavy fabric shears in his hand. "Drop them!" Bradley snarled, pulling a knife. Cole didn't drop them. Instead, he moved with the fluid grace of a man who'd faced down charging cattle and survived. The shears caught Bradley's knife hand, sending the blade spinning. Before Bradley could recover, Cole had him on the ground, knee in his back. Eliza appeared with her Winchester, still in her nightrobe, but steady as stone. "I'll watch him. You fetch the sheriff." "Pike won't." "Then fetch whoever will listen. Nora's got a cousin who's a ranger. Maybe it's time we involved real law." By full daylight, Bradley was tied to the hitching post outside the workshop, the oil-soaked rags displayed as evidence. Half the town had gathered, drawn by the commotion. Sheriff Pike arrived last, his face sour. "Now, let's not be hasty," Pike began. "Tom here was probably just breaking and entering with intent to commit arson." Cole interrupted. "Unless you're saying oil rags in a fabric shop at dawn have another purpose." The crowd muttered. Even those who disapproved of Eliza's independence couldn't stomach arson. Fire was every frontier town's nightmare. "I want him arrested," Eliza stated clearly. "Officially, with paperwork." Pike hesitated, glancing toward Dugan's office, but the crowd was growing, and among them were several influential ranchers who'd been buying from the sewing circle. Economics trumped loyalty. "All right," Pike said grudgingly. "Tom Bradley, you're under arrest." But as they led Bradley away, Eliza caught his muttered threat. "This ain't over. Dugan's got plans. You'll see." That night, she and Cole walked the workshop's perimeter, checking windows, testing locks. The confrontation had escalated things beyond mere harassment. They both knew it. "He'll hire professionals next time," Cole said quietly. "Men who won't get caught playing with oil rags." "Then we'll be ready." Eliza's jaw set stubbornly. "I won't run. Not from my home. Not from my work." "I'm not asking you to run." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the darkness. "I'm asking you to let me help protect what you've built. Not because you're weak, because you're valuable. To this town, to these women, to me." The admission hung between them like a bridge partially built, waiting for her to complete the span. "All right," she said finally. "But we do this properly. Hire guards if we must, document everything, build a case even Pike can't ignore. And if Dugan comes at us through legal channels, then we meet him there too. Margaret Patterson's daughter isn't the only one learning from me. I've been teaching her mother as well about contracts, assessments, the actual town charter." A small smile played at her lips. "Turns out Mrs. Patterson has a keen mind for legal details when properly motivated." Cole laughed, surprised. "You're building an army of educated women." "I'm building a community that doesn't need Silas Dugan's permission to exist." She resumed walking, her boots crunching on the gravel. "That frightens him more than any Winchester could." As if summoned by his name, Dugan appeared at the workshop the next morning. He didn't come alone. 2 hired men flanked him, their purpose obvious in their stance and the guns they wore. "Mrs. Mayfield." Dugan tipped his hat mockingly. "Heard you had some trouble last night." Nothing we couldn't handle. She continued pinning pattern pieces, refusing to be intimidated. Bradley's a hothead, acts without thinking. Dugan examined a half-finished uniform jacket. But he had the right idea. You're bad for business. Mrs. Mayfield. Women getting ideas, thinking they don't need men's protection, men's guidance. It's unnatural. What's unnatural is grown men so frightened of women earning honest wages that they resort to midnight raids. She met his gaze squarely. What exactly are you afraid of? Mr. Dugan. His face darkened. You think you're clever. Got yourself a protector in young Hartley. Got these women dancing to your tune. But Cole's daddy won't live forever. And when the ranch passes to new hands, where will you be then? Exactly where I am now. Working, surviving, building something that lasts longer than your threats. Dugan stepped closer, his men shifting to flank her. Last warning, woman, close shop, leave town, or face consequences you can't stitch back together. Is that a threat, Mr. Dugan? Cole's voice came from the doorway. He wasn't alone, either. 3 cowboys from the Diamond Bar stood with him. Because it sounded like a threat, in front of witnesses. The tension stretched like fabric pulled too tight. Finally, Dugan stepped back. Just friendly advice, he said smoothly. The frontier's dangerous for a woman alone. Good thing I'm not alone then. After Dugan left, the cowboys lingered. Ma'am, the eldest said, the boys and I been talking. Our women are part of your circle now. That makes their troubles our troubles. You need night guards. We'll take shifts. It was more than protection, it was recognition. The sewing circle had become something larger than any of them had imagined. As Eliza looked at the men willing to stand guard, at Cole organizing schedules, at the women arriving for the day's work, she felt something she hadn't experienced since James died belonging. That night, she worked late finishing a particularly complex jacket. Cole kept watch outside, visible through the window. When she finally emerged, he was whittling by lamplight, turning wood into something delicate. What are you making? He held up the piece of wooden needle, decorative rather than functional, carved with surprising skill. Seemed appropriate, he said, offering it to her. She took it carefully, running her fingers over the smooth wood. It's beautiful. It's a promise, he corrected, that whatever comes, we'll face it together. One stitch at a time, like you said. The wooden needle caught the lamplight as she turned it. A simple gift that spoke of complex futures. Tomorrow would bring new challenges Dugan wouldn't accept defeat easily. But tonight, under the vast desert stars, surrounded by friends and protected by community, Eliza Mayfield allowed herself a moment of pure hope. The seamstress who had stitched alone for so long was alone no longer, and the passion that grew between her and Cole was sown not just into stolen nights, but into the very fabric of the life they were building together. The attack came at dusk, when the light was treacherous and most folks were sitting down to supper. Eliza had stayed late to finish a delicate piece of embroidery, the workshop quiet except for the rhythmic whisper of thread through fabric. She heard boots on the wooden walkway outside, not the familiar tread of Cole or the other guards, but something predatory and deliberate. Tom Bradley burst through the door, his face twisted with rage and humiliation. The scar from her scissors stood out livid against his flushed skin. Thought you were done with me, didn't you? He advanced, backing her against the cutting table. Thought your rich boy and his hired guns would keep you safe. Eliza's hand found her scissors, always within reach. Get out, Bradley. You're already facing charges. Charges that'll disappear once Dugan pays the right people. He lunged, grabbing for her wrist. The scissors flashed again, but this time Bradley was ready. He knocked them from her grip, pinning her arms. His breath reeked of whiskey and malice. Time you learned your place, woman. Eliza drove her knee upward, making him grunt and loosen his grip. She twisted free, scrambling for anything the heavy shears. A pressing iron. Anything. But Bradley recovered quickly. catching her by the hair, yanking her head back. The workshop door exploded inward. Cole and Nora burst in together, Nora carrying her old Remington rifle. The barrel swung toward Bradley with deadly precision. "Let her go," Nora commanded, her voice steady as her aim. "Won't ask twice." Bradley released Eliza, raising his hands, but as he backed away, his boot caught the oil lamp on the work table. Whether by accident or design, it toppled, oil spreading across the fabric samples. "No!" Eliza dove for the lamp, but Cole caught her, pulling her back as flames bloomed across the table. "The fabric, the orders." She fought against his grip, watching weeks of work catch fire. "Let it burn," he said firmly, dragging her outside. "Things can be replaced. You can't—" Nora kept her rifle trained on Bradley as they evacuated. The fire brigade formed quickly this time. Word of the last fire had made everyone vigilant. Buckets passed hand to hand, and the flames were contained to the one table, though smoke damage touched everything. Bradley tried to slip away in the chaos, but the cowboys from Diamond Bar had other ideas. They held him until Sheriff Pike arrived, and this time with half the town as witnesses and Nora's rifle still prominently displayed. Even Pike couldn't pretend nothing had happened. Attempted assault. Cole stated flatly. Arson, in front of witnesses. "Now hold on," Pike began, but Mary Patterson stepped forward. "I saw everything from my window," the banker's wife announced. "Mr. Bradley attacked Mrs. Mayfield with clear intent to harm. If you won't do your duty, Sheriff, I'll wire the territorial marshal myself." The crowd murmured approval. Pike, caught between Dugan's money and the town's growing anger, chose self-preservation. "Tom Bradley, you're under arrest. Again." As they led Bradley away, Eliza surveyed the damage. Smoke-stained walls, ruined fabric, water damage from the brigade's efforts, but the singer sat untouched, and the lockbox with completed uniforms had survived. "We'll rebuild," Cole said quietly. Stronger this time. With what money? Exhaustion made her honest. "I can't keep taking your loans. Cole, it's not right." "Then don't." Nora lowered her rifle at last. "Take ours instead. The sewing circle's been saving. Every woman's been putting aside a penny here, a nickel there. It's not much, but—" "It's enough," Sarah interrupted, appearing with a cloth bag. Other women emerged from the gathering crowd, each adding coins to the collection. "We're investing in ourselves." Eliza's throat tightened. "I can't." "You can and you will." "Mrs." Chen said firmly. "You taught us to stand together. Now stand with us." The next morning brought unexpected allies. Judge William Carson, the circuit judge, had arrived 2 days early for his quarterly visit. Word of the attack had reached him at the hotel, along with a carefully documented list of incidents prepared by Mary Patterson and the banker's extensive legal library. "Seems Dusty Point has a problem with law and order," the judge observed. Reviewing the papers in Eliza's rebuilt workshop, he was a spare man with eyes like flint, known for his intolerance of corruption. "Sheriff Pike's been remarkably ineffective. Sheriff Pike's been remarkably well compensated by certain parties," Cole said bluntly. "That's a serious accusation. Mr. Hartley—" "It's a serious situation, Your Honor." Eliza stepped forward. "We have witnesses willing to testify about bribery, intimidation, and attempted arson. What we need is someone willing to listen." Judge Carson studied her for a long moment. "I'm listening now. Mrs. Mayfield, let's start from the beginning." The story poured out not just Eliza's troubles, but the systematic harassment of the sewing circle, the economic warfare waged by Dugan, the corruption that infected the town's leadership. Other women added their testimonies: wages stolen by husbands and given to Dugan's gambling halls, threats made against those who joined the circle, accidents that befell those who defied the established order. "Enough," the judge said finally. "I'll convene a formal hearing tomorrow. Public testimony, properly recorded." He looked at Sheriff Pike, who'd been summoned to attend. "You'll want to prepare your defense, Sheriff, and Mr. Dugan should be notified that his presence is required." That night, the workshop became a war room. Women who'd never spoken publicly prepared their statements. Mary Patterson coached them on legal procedures. Eliza organized evidence-damaged fabric, threatening notes, documentation of the mysterious fees that drained their earnings. "You realize what you're risking," Cole warned quietly as they worked. "Dugan won't go down without a fight. Neither will the men who profit from the current system." "What system?" Eliza asked. "The one where women can't walk safely after dark, where honest work is sabotaged because it threatens some man's control." She shook her head. "That system needs burning more than my fabric did." He touched her hand briefly, a gesture of support that sent warmth through her tired bones. "Then we'll light the match together." The hearing convened in the saloon, the largest building in town, cleared of gaming tables and filled with chairs. Judge Carson presided from behind the bar, an incongruous but fitting symbol of justice in a lawless place. Eliza testified first, her voice clear and steady as she recounted months of harassment. She produced evidence: the ruined fabric, the inflated bills, Bradley's attacks. When Dugan's lawyer tried to suggest she'd invited trouble by operating inappropriately, she responded with acid precision. "I sew clothes. Sir, I pay taxes when they're legitimate. I employ women who need work. If that's inappropriate, then perhaps it's your definitions that need mending, not my behavior." One by one, the women of the sewing circle spoke. Sarah described wages stolen. Mrs. Chen detailed threats made against her family. Nora presented her own books, showing how Dugan's control of supplies had nearly starved out honest businesses. The dam broke when young Jenny Morrison, the sheriff's own daughter, stood up. "My PA takes money," she said simply. "Every week, Mr. Dugan's man comes by. Pa says it's for keeping the peace. But what peace is there when women fear the dark?" Sheriff Pike's face went white, then red. "Jenny, you don't understand." "I understand plenty," she retorted. "I understand Ma crying because there's no money for medicine. I understand you looking away when Mrs. Mayfield needed help. I understand being ashamed of my own father." The courtroom erupted. Pike lunged for his daughter, but the cowboys blocked him. Dugan stood, his controlled mask finally slipping. "This is a farce. You're listening to hysterical women and disgruntled children." "I'm listening to citizens of this territory," Judge Carson interrupted. "Citizens whose rights have been systematically violated. Sit down, Mr. Dugan, or be held in contempt." The testimonies continued all day. By evening, the judge had heard enough. "Sheriff Pike, you're suspended pending territorial investigation. Your badge, please." Pike removed it with shaking hands. "Mr. Dugan, you're fined $500 for interference with legitimate business, with additional charges pending. Any further harassment of these women will result in immediate imprisonment." "You can't," Dugan began. "I can, and I have." The judge's gavel came down like thunder. "This court is adjourned." But Eliza knew it wasn't over. Legal victories were one thing. Changing hearts and systems was another. As the crowd dispersed, she saw the calculations in certain men's eyes, the resentment in others. Bradley was in jail. Dugan publicly humiliated, Pike disgraced. But ideas, once planted, were harder to uproot than any weed. "You did it," Cole said quietly as they stood outside the saloon. "You brought down Silas Dugan." "We did it," she corrected. "All of us together. And it's not done yet. This was just the first seam. There's still a whole garment to construct." That night, the women of the sewing circle gathered in the workshop not to sew, but to plan. They had momentum now, and Judge Carson's ruling gave them legal standing. But laws were only as strong as those willing to enforce them. "We need our own people in positions of power," Mary Patterson said. "The town council elections are coming. Perhaps it's time Dusty Point had some new voices. Women can't vote, someone pointed out. Not yet, Eliza agreed. But we can influence those who do. We can organize. We can make it clear that any candidate who wants our support and our husbands' and fathers' votes needs to support us in return. As the meeting wound down and women headed home in groups, another new precaution that was becoming habit, Cole lingered. Your shop's half ruined. Dugan's not done fighting. Bradley's friends are still out there. Are you sure you want to keep pushing? Eliza looked around the smoke-stained workshop, at the singer sitting patient and ready, at the work orders pinned to the wall. 2 years ago, I just wanted to survive, to stitch my grief into something manageable. She met his eyes. Now I want more. I want to live without fear. I want every woman in this town to have the chances I'm fighting for. Is that too much to ask? Not too much, Cole said softly. Just enough, just right. Outside, the desert night spread endless and dark, but in the workshop, surrounded by the tools of her trade and the evidence of community, Eliza Mayfield began planning the next phase of her quiet revolution. One that would be sown not with thread, but with votes, voices, and the unshakable determination of women who'd found their power in solidarity. The seamstress had stitched alone no longer, and the passion between her and Cole, still careful, still growing, was just one thread in the larger tapestry they were weaving together. Saturday morning broke harsh and bright, the sun already a hammer on the anvil of the desert. The town square filled early. Word of Judge Carson's presence had traveled fast, drawing folks from outlying ranches and settlements. What had started as a hearing about harassment had become something larger, a reckoning for Dusty Point. Eliza stood before the makeshift court, her evidence laid out with the same precision she used for pattern pieces. The contracts with inflated fees, the fabric destroyed by sabotage, the testimonies written in careful hands by women who'd never before spoken publicly about their troubles. Your Honor, she began, her voice carrying across the crowded square. What I present isn't just about one woman's business or even one group's struggles. It's about whether law means the same thing for everyone, or only for those who can afford to buy it. Judge Carson, seated behind a table borrowed from the hotel, nodded for her to continue. His presence alone had shifted the town's atmosphere. Federal authority carried weight that local corruption couldn't easily dismiss. These documents show a pattern, Eliza continued, lifting each piece of evidence. Fees that apply only to businesses owned by women or those who support us. Damage that mysteriously occurs to those who stand against Mr. Dugan's interests. Threats that Sheriff Pike consistently failed to investigate. Objection. Dugan's lawyer, imported from Santa Fe for the occasion, stood smoothly. These are merely business disputes, not criminal matters. My client has every right to compete aggressively in the marketplace. Aggressive competition doesn't include arson. Cole interjected from where he stood with the other witnesses. Or assault, or bribery of law enforcement. The judge raised a hand for silence. I'll hear all testimonies before making any rulings. Mrs. Oleson, you're next. Nora took the stand with her characteristic dignity, describing years of systematic pressure. Every woman who showed independence faced the same treatment. Higher prices at Dugan-controlled stores. Husbands pressured at work to control their women. Mysterious accidents. She looked directly at Dugan. My first husband died in one of those accidents. Fell from a roof he'd worked on for 20 years, the day after I refused to sell my boarding house to Mr. Dugan's associates. A ripple went through the crowd. This was older history, darker than many had known. The testimonies continued. Mrs. Chen described finding her laundry slashed, the washing kettles overturned. After she joined the sewing circle, Sarah told of being followed home, threatened with ruin if she continued working with Eliza. Even Mary Patterson, respectable banker's wife, testified about the sudden audit of their books after she'd supported the women's cause. Then came the surprise witness, young Timothy Martinez, who worked as a messenger for various businesses, stepped forward nervously. "I got something to say," he announced, clutching a worn envelope. "About Sheriff Pike and Mr. Dugan." The boy produced a ledger Pike's private accounts, which Timothy had been asked to deliver but had looked inside first. The entries were damning regular payments from Dugan, notes about handled situations, dates that matched every incident the women had reported. Pike leaped to his feet. "That's stolen property! You can't—" "Sit down, Mr. Pike," Judge Carson commanded. "You're no longer sheriff here, and theft of evidence is a lesser crime than what this evidence reveals." The crowd grew restless as the implications sank in. Men who'd dismissed the women's complaints shifted uncomfortably. Some who'd participated in the harassment began edging toward the exits, only to find Cole's cowboys blocking the way. "Your Honor." Dugan finally stood, his composure cracking. "This is a coordinated attack on established business interests. These women seek to overturn the natural order." "The only order I see being overturned," the judge interrupted, "is the illegal one you've maintained through intimidation and bribery." He turned to address the crowd. "Let me be clear. The territorial government takes a dim view of communities that operate as private fiefdoms. Mr. Dugan, you're hereby fined $1,000 for conspiracy to interfere with lawful business. Further investigation may lead to criminal charges." "This is outrageous." Dugan's face flushed purple. "You're destroying everything we've built here on the word of hysterical females and disgruntled employees." "No," Eliza said quietly, but her voice carried, "We're building something better, something that doesn't require women to live in fear or beg for the right to earn honest wages." The judge continued his rulings. Pike faced territorial charges and immediate removal from office. Several of Dugan's enforcers were arrested on assault charges. The mysterious fees were declared void, with refunds ordered. But it was Eliza's final statement that rang across the square. "We don't seek to ruin anyone. We seek only to work, to live, to contribute to this community as equals. The sewing circle will continue, our businesses will grow, and any man who stands with us will find partners, not servants. Any who stand against us." She paused, meeting Dugan's furious gaze. "Well, they'll find we've learned to use more than just needles in our own defense." The crowd erupted cheers from the women and their supporters, angry mutters from Dugan's remaining allies. Judge Carson gavelled for order, but the divide was clear. Dusty Point would never be the same. As the official proceedings ended, Cole's father appeared, still weak from his recent illness, but standing straight. The crowd parted as Samuel Hartley approached the judge's table. "Your Honor," the elder Hartley said, his voice carrying the authority of decades. "I've been a fool. Built my empire on the backs of men like Dugan. Turned a blind eye to the cost." He looked at Eliza, then at his son. "These women have shown more courage than most men I know. The Hartley Ranch stands with them. Any man who works for me who can't accept that can find employment elsewhere." The statement sent shockwaves through the crowd. Samuel Hartley's support meant economic protection the women hadn't dared hope for. It also meant Cole's position and his growing relationship with Eliza had family backing. That evening, Dusty Point felt like a town holding its breath. Dugan's saloon sat nearly empty, his supporters either arrested or reconsidering their allegiances. The workshop hummed with activity as women gathered not just to sew, but to plan. "We need a new sheriff," Mary Patterson noted, reviewing the town charter. "The mayor can appoint an interim candidate until elections." "Tom Brennan," Nora suggested. "He's fair, doesn't drink, and his wife's one of us." "We need more than that," Eliza added. "We need protection for what we've built. Legal protections written into the town charter. Business licenses that can't be revoked on a whim. Education funds so girls learn more than just domestics." Cole listened from his position by the door, standing guard but also witnessing transformation. These women weren't just seeking survival anymore. They were architecting a future Near midnight. As the meeting dispersed, Eliza found herself alone with Cole on the workshop steps. The stars blazed overhead, indifferent to human struggles, but somehow comforting in their constancy. "Your father surprised me today," she admitted. "Surprised himself, I think." Cole smiled wryly. "Ma's been gone 10 years, but I swear I heard her voice in his words. She always said the measure of a man wasn't what he built, but who he lifted while building." Wise woman. "Like another I know." He took her hand, calloused fingers gentle against her work-worn palm. "Eliza, what happens now, Dugan won't accept this quietly. He's got friends in Santa Fe, connections we can't match. Then we build our own connections. Every uniform we sew for the railroad, every rancher who buys from us, every woman who learns to read contracts, they're all threads in a net Dugan can't tear. And us?" The question hung between them, weighted with possibility. "We continue as we've begun," she said softly. "Honestly, carefully, building something meant to last. Not just burn bright and fast." Cole lifted her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm, a gesture both tender and reverent. "The seamstress who stitched alone found her army. The rancher's son who rode alone found his purpose," she countered. They sat in companionable silence, aware that tomorrow would bring new challenges. Dugan's wealth hadn't vanished with one ruling. The attitudes that allowed his control wouldn't change overnight, but something fundamental had shifted in Dusty Point's foundation. In the workshop behind them, the Singer's sewing machine sat ready for morning's work. On the cutting table, orders waited not just for uniforms now, but for the banners women wanted for their businesses, the curtains for the new school fund committee meeting room, the tablecloths for the community dinners they planned. Thread by thread, stitch by stitch, they were reweaving their world, and if some of those threads bound Eliza and Cole closer together, if passion threaded through their careful courtship like silk through cotton well, that too was part of the pattern emerging in the harsh beauty of the desert night. The revolution had been sown with testimonies instead of bullets, but it was revolution nonetheless. And in Dusty Point, New Mexico, the women who'd found their voices were just beginning to sing. The fire started just after midnight, when the wind was high and the town slept. Eliza woke to the acrid smell of smoke and the orange glow dancing on her boarding house wall. She knew before she even reached the window the workshop was burning. By the time she arrived, still in her nightdress, with only a shawl thrown over, the flames had consumed the new roof and were eating through the walls. The fire brigade was already forming a bucket line, but the wind-whipped flames mocked their efforts. Cole appeared through the smoke, soot-streaked and desperate, helping direct the water toward the neighboring buildings to prevent the fire's spread. "The Singer!" Eliza started toward the inferno, but strong hands caught her Tom Brennan, the new interim sheriff. "It's gone, Mrs. Mayfield," he said firmly but not unkindly. "The whole structure's coming down." She watched 20 months of rebuilding collapse into ember and ash. The fabric inventory, the completed uniforms awaiting delivery, the carefully kept books, all of it feeding the hungry flames. But worse than the material loss was the knowledge that this was no accident. The smell of kerosene cut through the smoke, and boot prints in the dirt told their own story. "Found him." One of the cowboys dragged a figure into the firelight, not Bradley this time, but a stranger, his clothes reeking of accelerant, a professional, hired from outside. The man spat at their feet. "Won't talk. Don't matter what you do." "Don't need you to talk," Cole said grimly. "Your boots match the prints. The kerosene on your clothes tells the story. And that burn on your hand says you were careless with the matches." As dawn broke over the smoldering ruins, the sewing circle gathered. Some wept at the devastation. Others stood silent, faces carved from stone. The Singer, that faithful machine that had survived so much, was a twisted mass of metal in the ashes. "It's over," Sarah whispered. "How can we continue without—" "No!" Eliza's voice cut through the despair. "It's not over. They want us to think it is, but it's not. She turned to face the women. We've lost things before. Husbands, children, homes. Did we stop living? Did we stop fighting? But we have nothing left, another woman protested. No machines, no fabric, no shelter. We have our hands. Eliza interrupted. We have our skills. We have each other. And now we have something else, proof that they fear us enough to bring in outside killers. Tom Brennan had been questioning the arsonist. He returned with a grim expression. He won't name who hired him, but his horse has a Santa Fe livery brand. 3 guesses who has connections there. Dugan, Cole said flatly. Playing his last cards. Then let's play ours. Eliza declared. Mary, how much is in the Circle's emergency fund? $43.60. Enough for train fare to Santa Fe. I'll go to the territorial capital. Speak to the governor himself if needed. This ends now. You can't go alone, Nora protested. She won't, Cole said. I'm going with her. And we're taking evidence photographs of the ruins, the arsonist's confession, everything Judge Carson documented. While they planned the journey, unexpected help arrived. Samuel Hartley appeared with a wagon full of lumber and a crew of ranch hands. For rebuilding, he said simply. This time with adobe walls. Let's see them burn that. Other ranchers followed suit. By noon, the ruins were being cleared and foundation lines marked. But the real surprise came from the railroad office. Mr. Holst, the German foreman, arrived with an envelope. The company heard about the fire, he said. They're advancing payment for future orders. Also, he produced a second envelope. The ladies at our Chicago headquarters took up a collection when they heard about your circle. $150. They said to tell you women must stand together, east or west. Eliza's hands trembled as she accepted the money. It was more than charity. It was recognition from women they'd never meet. Solidarity that stretched across a continent. The preparations for Santa Fe continued through the day. Evidence was gathered, documents copied, testimonies notarized by Judge Carson before his departure. But as evening approached, a complication arose. Bradley had been released from jail in sufficient evidence. The district attorney claimed he was seen drinking in what remained of Dugan's saloon, boasting about unfinished business. We can't leave the women unprotected, Cole argued. And we can't miss the territorial assembly session. Eliza countered. This is our chance to get real protection, not just local promises. The solution came from an unexpected source. Margaret Holbrook, the banker's daughter Cole was supposed to marry, arrived at the temporary headquarters with her father. Miss Mayfield, she said formally, I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want to help. My father and I will personally guarantee the Circle's safety while you're gone. Any man who threatens these women will find their loans called in immediately. Banker Holbrook nodded. My Margaret's made her position clear. I stand with my daughter. It was economic warfare of a different kind. The power of debt turned shield instead of sword. Dugan's supporters, many of whom owed the bank money, would think twice before acting. That night, Eliza and Cole prepared for departure in the ruins of the workshop, lit by lanterns. She knelt by the twisted remains of the singer. James saved 2 years for this machine, she said quietly. It was his last gift. I thought if I lost it, I'd lose that last piece of him. Cole knelt beside her. You haven't lost him. Every woman you've taught, every stand you've taken, that's his legacy too. The machine was just metal. What you built with it can't burn. She leaned into his strength, allowing herself a moment of grief. Then, with the practicality that had carried her through widowhood and worse, she stood and brushed off her skirts. We leave at dawn. Time to end this properly. The community gathered to see them off at the stage depot. Women pressed small gifts into Eliza's hands. A handkerchief embroidered with justice in red thread. A small sewing kit for the journey. Dried flowers from desert blooms that survived despite harsh conditions. As the stage prepared to leave, Dugan appeared one last time. His empire was crumbling the judge's fines. The loss of support, the federal attention, but his hatred remained strong. "You think you've won," he called out. "You've destroyed the natural order of things. When this all collapses, when your women are starving because they've forgotten their place." "Our place," Eliza interrupted from the stage window, "is wherever we choose to stand, and we choose to stand together." The stage lurched into motion, carrying them toward Santa Fe and a larger battle. Behind them, smoke still rose from the workshop ruins, but ahead, the sun climbed over the mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and possibility. Cole took her hand as Dusty Point disappeared behind them. "Whatever happens in Santa Fe, we face it together," she finished. "Like everything else." The wooden needle he'd carved for her rested in her pocket, smooth from handling. It had survived the fire, a small miracle she chose to see as a sign. They were leaving ashes behind, but carrying flame forward, not the destructive kind that had taken the workshop, but the steady light of determination that no amount of kerosene could extinguish. In the distance, a hawk circled, riding the thermals above the desert, like the women of the sewing circle. It had learned to find lift in the harshest conditions, to soar where others saw only scorched earth. The seamstress who had once stitched alone was riding toward the capital with an army at her back, their threads of solidarity stretching across miles and mountains. The fire had taken things that could be replaced. What remained, the bonds forged in shared struggle, the love growing between two unlikely souls. The revolution, sown one testimony at a time, burned brighter than any arsonist's flame. And in Santa Fe, the territorial government was about to learn what happened when frontier women stopped asking for justice and started demanding it. The evidence trail led through dusty records and whispered testimonies, each piece adding weight to the truth everyone suspected but few dared voice. The hired arsonist's boots had left distinctive prints, a worn heel with a missing nail that created a crescent-shaped mark. Tom Brennan had traced those prints from the workshop to a camp outside town where 3 horses waited, their Santa Fe livery brands still fresh. Judge Carson, though his official duties had ended, remained in Dusty Point one extra day to help build the case. In his hotel room, he met with Eliza, Cole, and the new sheriff to review what they'd gathered. "It's circumstantial," the judge admitted, studying the photographs of boot prints and burn patterns. "But combined with the testimonies and Dugan's documented history, it paints a clear picture. Clear won't matter if no one's willing to look," Cole said bluntly. "Dugan's got friends in the territorial government." "Then we make them look," Eliza responded. "The newspapers in Santa Fe, the women's societies, the churches, we tell everyone who'll listen. Make it too public to ignore." Samuel Hartley entered without knocking, his face grave. "There's more. My foreman just came from the Dugan ranch. Place is near empty livestock, sold off quick. Household goods packed. Dugan's running." "Or regrouping," Tom Brennan suggested. "Man like that doesn't give up easy." The meeting continued past midnight, strategies forming like quilt patterns, each piece necessary for the whole. By dawn, they had a plan that relied not on legal channels alone, but on the network of women that stretched from Dusty Point to Santa Fe and beyond. The community gathering the next day took place in the open air where the workshop had stood. The adobe walls were already rising, mixed and laid by dozens of hands. But first, there was justice to pursue. "This is our home," Eliza addressed the crowd, standing on a makeshift platform of salvaged boards. "We've built lives here, raised children, buried loved ones, and we won't be driven out by men who mistake fear for power." She held up the evidence photographs, testimony copies, the arsonist's boot they'd kept as proof. "Silas Dugan paid to burn us out when threats didn't work. When the law finally stood with us, he resorted to destruction. But he forgot something." She paused, meeting the eyes of the women scattered through the crowd. "Fire refines as well as destroys. What remains is stronger than what burned." The crowd's energy shifted, determination replacing despair. Men who'd been neutral stepped forward, offering support. Cowboys from various ranches volunteered to track Dugan's movements. Even some who'd benefited from the old system recognized which way the wind was blowing. Tom Bradley pushed through the crowd then, whiskey courage in his stride and his scarred face twisted with old rage. You think you've won something, Dugan's gone. But there's others. You can't change nature. Women got their place, and it ain't. The crack of a rifle shot cut him off. Nora Oleson stood at the crowd's edge, her Remington pointed skyward, smoke wisping from the barrel. Mr. Bradley, she said calmly. You were saying... Bradley's liquid courage evaporated. He looked around, finding no support in the crowd, then slunk away. But his words had revealed a truth. Dugan was just one head of a hydra that stretched throughout the territory. That afternoon, unexpected allies arrived. A delegation of women from Las Cruces, led by the mayor's wife, came to see the destruction and offer support. They brought more than sympathy. They carried letters from women's organizations throughout New Mexico, pledging boycotts of businesses that discriminated against female entrepreneurs. We heard what you've built here. Mrs. Vega, the delegation's leader, explained. Not just the sewing circle, but the idea that women can stand together, protect each other, thrive despite opposition. That idea is spreading like wildfire. Cole found Eliza later at the ruins of the Singer, carefully extracting small metal pieces that might be salvaged. These women from Las Cruces, he said. They're talking about territorial legislation, protection for women's businesses written into law. Talk is easy, making it happen is harder. She held up a small gear, miraculously intact. But sometimes the smallest pieces survive to build something new. That evening brought revelation. Young Timothy Martinez, the messenger boy who'd exposed Pike's corruption, came running with news. Found him Dugan's holed up at the old Chavez Ranch, 15 miles north. Saw his man Vicente buying supplies in Socorro. The information triggered heated debate. Some wanted immediate pursuit. Others counseled waiting for federal marshals. But it was Samuel Hartley who proposed the solution. We go as a community, he said. Not a mob, not vigilantes. Citizens making a lawful arrest, with our appointed sheriff leading. We show that Dusty Point stands by its own justice. The expedition formed at dawn 30 riders, including ranchers, cowboys, and several women who could shoot as well as they could sew. Eliza rode beside Cole, her divided skirt practical for the journey, the wooden needle tucked safe in her pocket like a talisman. The Chavez Ranch sat in a valley where cottonwoods marked a struggling creek, once prosperous. It had been abandoned after drought killed the wells. Now smoke rose from the chimney, and horses stood in the corral, Dugan's last redoubt. Tom Brennan called out from behind cover. Silas Dugan, you're wanted for conspiracy, arson, and attempted murder. Come out peaceable. The response came in gunfire shots that kicked up dust but found no targets. The riders spread out, taking positions that cut off escape routes. It was a siege, not a battle, and time favored justice. You're finished, Dugan, Cole shouted. Your money's frozen. Your men deserted you. Even Santa Fe won't shelter you now. More shots, but desperate ones. Then Brady's voice, high with fear. I ain't dying for him, I'm coming out. Brady emerged, hands high, followed by 2 other hired guns. That left Dugan and perhaps 1 or 2 loyalists. The sun climbed higher, heat building in the valley like pressure in a pot. Finally, Dugan himself appeared in the doorway, still trying for dignity in his dusty black suit. You've destroyed everything, he called out. The order that built this territory. The system that kept women slaves and men either tyrants or cowards. Eliza interrupted, riding forward despite Cole's protest. Yes, Mr. Dugan, we've destroyed that, and from its ashes, we'll build something better. Dugan's hand twitched toward his gun, but 20 rifles swinging his way changed his mind. Tom Brennan moved in, securing the weapons, reading the charges in a clear voice that carried across the valley. As they prepared to transport the prisoners back to Dusty Point, Dugan made one last attempt. "You think this ends with me? Every town from here to California runs the same way. You're fighting human nature itself." "Then we'll keep fighting," Eliza replied simply. "One town, one law, one stitch at a time." The return to Dusty Point felt like a festival parade. People lined the streets, watching the man who'd terrorized them for years brought in like common criminals. At the jail, reinforced now and under honest management, Dugan and his remaining supporters were locked away to await federal marshals. That night, the community celebrated in the space where the new workshop was rising. Tables appeared laden with food, guitars emerged, and for the first time in memory, women danced freely in the main street without fear of judgment or worse. Cole found Eliza standing apart, watching the celebration with thoughtful eyes. "You did it," he said softly. "You brought down Silas Dugan, changed this town, started something that's spreading across the territory." "We did it," she corrected, but smiled. "And it's far from over. There are more Dugans out there, more towns where women live in fear, more battles to fight." "But not tonight." He held out his hand. "Tonight, we celebrate. Dance with me." She hesitated. Public dancing would cement what everyone suspected about them, would cross lines that couldn't be uncrossed. Then she thought of all the lines she'd already crossed, all the boundaries she'd broken, and placed her hand in his. They danced under the stars while the wooden needle rested in her pocket and the adobe walls of the new workshop stood witness. Around them, women who'd learned their own strength laughed and sang, planning futures that would have been impossible just months before. In the jail, Dugan sat in darkness, his empire reduced to iron bars and the knowledge that he'd been brought down not by rival businessmen or government intervention, but by women with needles and thread and the courage to say enough. The seamstress had stitched more than garments. She'd woven a net of solidarity that stretched across the desert, binding women together in shared purpose. And the rancher's son who'd sown passion into her nights had become something more, a partner in rebuilding not just a workshop or a business, but an entire way of life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The trial, the territorial legislation, the slow work of changing hearts as well as laws. But tonight, under the vast New Mexico sky, they danced and planned and refused to let fear dictate their limits. The revolution was far from over. It had only just begun to catch fire. Autumn arrived in Dusty Point with its familiar rhythms, cooler nights, golden light that softened the harsh edges of the desert, and the rustle of dried grass that whispered of coming winter. But this autumn was different. The new workshop stood complete, its adobe walls thick and solid, crowned with red tiles that gleamed in the afternoon sun. A wooden sign hung above the door, Dusty Point Sewing Cooperative. No longer just Eliza's business, but a true partnership of 15 women who shared ownership, profits, and decisions. The railroad contract had been renewed and expanded. Orders came now from other towns where women had heard of their success. The cooperative employed 23 people, including Tom Bradley, who worked in the supply warehouse with a quiet dedication that surprised everyone. His public apology, halting but sincere, had been another small victory in the larger war of changing hearts. Inside the workshop, the rhythm of productivity filled the air. 5 Singer sewing machines purchased with the combined funds from Chicago donations and contract profits hummed in harmony. Eliza moved between the stations, checking work, offering guidance, her movements confident and assured. The wooden needle Cole had carved hung from a cord around her neck, polished smooth by constant wear. Mrs. Chen, that embroidery is exceptional," she noted, examining a jacket destined for a Santa Fe hotel. "Sarah, remember to reinforce the stress points on those riding skirts." The changes in Dusty Point extended beyond the workshop walls. The town council now included 2 women, Mary Patterson and Nora O'Leeson, elected in a campaign that had divided households but ultimately prevailed. The new sheriff, Tom Brennan, had hired a female deputy, scandalizing traditionalists but proving effective when dealing with domestic disputes that Pike had always ignored. Samuel Hartley entered the workshop. His health recovered and his manner transformed. "Ladies," he announced, "the territorial legislature has passed the Women's Business Protection Act. Any harassment or discrimination against female-owned businesses is now a territorial crime." Cheers erupted from the workers. It had taken months of lobbying, letters, and testimonies, but the seed planted in Dusty Point had flowered into law. Eliza felt Cole's hand briefly touch her shoulder, a gesture both proud and proprietary, but welcome now in their changed relationship. "There's more," Samuel continued. "They're citing the Dusty Point Cooperative as the model for similar organizations territory-wide. You've started something that's spreading like prairie fire." That evening, Reverend Alden performed a different kind of ceremony than his usual services. The church was full, but the atmosphere held joy rather than judgment. He'd learned, slowly and sometimes painfully, that righteousness came in many forms, including women who refused to accept limitations placed on their potential. "Do you, Eliza Mayfield, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" The Reverend's voice carried none of its former condescension. "I do," Eliza replied, her voice clear and certain. She wore a dress of her own, making cream-colored silk with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs, each stitch placed with the same precision she brought to everything in her life. "Do you, Cole Hartley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." Cole's rough hands were gentle as they held hers, his eyes reflecting the candles and something deeper respect, passion, and partnership combined. The wedding feast took place in the workshop itself. Tables arranged between the sewing stations, the adobe walls decorated with quilts made by the circle members. It was a celebration not just of two people joining their lives, but of a community transformed. Silas Dugan had been convicted and sentenced to 5 years in territorial prison, a light sentence, some said, but symbolic in its way. His empire had crumbled, his properties divided and sold, many bought by the very women he'd tried to suppress. The old saloon now housed a lending library and meeting hall, managed by the Women's Literary Society. As the evening progressed, toasts were raised and stories shared. Margaret Holbrook, who'd become one of the cooperative's strongest supporters, stood to speak. "A year ago, I was prepared to marry out of duty, to be the ornament my father's position required. These women showed me I could be more, that we all could be more." Tom Bradley, sober now for 6 months, added his voice. "I was wrong, did wrong. Can't undo that, but I can work to be better. These ladies gave me that chance when they didn't have to. That's real strength, lifting up even those who tried to tear you down." As the celebration continued around them, Eliza and Cole stepped outside into the cool desert night. The stars spread above them in their eternal patterns, unchanging witnesses to the human dramas below. 2 years ago, I sat in that doorway stitching a wedding dress for another woman. Eliza reflected. I thought my life was over, that I was just marking time until I joined James. And now I know that life can begin again. That loss doesn't mean the end of growth. That love. She looked up at him, this man who'd entered her life carrying a sewing machine through smoke and had stayed to help rebuild everything. Love can be different the second time. Not lesser, just different, built on choice rather than chance. Cole pulled her close, his arms strong around her. The seamstress who stitched alone found that some patterns are better made by two, she finished, smiling at their private joke that had become public truth. They returned to the celebration to find the women of the cooperative presenting their wedding gift, a new Singer sewing machine, the latest model, with a brass plate attached to Eliza Hartley, who taught us that threads of courage, woven together, can bind a community in strength. Later, as the party wound down and guests departed in groups, another habit that had become tradition, Cole and Eliza stood in their workshop now, legally and emotionally. The machines sat silent, waiting for tomorrow's labor. Orders were pinned to the board uniforms for the railroad, dresses for the Harvey House restaurants, work clothes for ranches that now proudly bought from the cooperative. "We did it," Cole said softly. "Change this town, change the territory, even—" "We started something," Eliza corrected. "Practical even in victory. There's still work to do. Women in other towns facing what we faced. Girls growing up who need to know they have choices. Men who need to learn that strength comes in many forms. Then we keep working, keep building, keep stitching those threads of change." She kissed him then, there in the workshop that had risen from ashes, surrounded by the tools of transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did in the desert. But tonight, they had each other, a community of allies, and the knowledge that change was possible, one careful stitch at a time. Outside, coyotes sang their ancient songs to the stars. Inside, the wooden needle rested against Eliza's heart, a carved promise kept. The seamstress no longer stitched alone. The rancher's son had indeed sown passion into her nights, but more than that, he'd helped weave a future where such passion could exist openly, honestly, without shame or fear. In Dusty Point, New Mexico, the revolution continued. It looked like women laughing over their sewing machines, like men learning to see partners instead of property, like children growing up in a world with fewer barriers and broader horizons. It looked like love that strengthened rather than diminished, and work that built dignity along with income. The threads they'd spun would stretch far beyond their lifetimes, reaching places they'd never see, touching lives they'd never know. But it had started here, with a widow's determination, a burned workshop, and the radical idea that women deserved to live without fear, to work without harassment, to love without losing themselves. The story of the seamstress and the rancher's son would be told in many ways over the years, growing and changing with each telling. But at its heart would always remain this truth: when people stand together, when they refuse to accept injustice as inevitable, when they pick up their tools, whether needles or hammers, and build something better, they can transform not just their own lives, but the very fabric of society itself. In the workshop where threads became garments, where courage became community, where love grew strong enough to challenge an entire system, the sewing machines waited for dawn and another day of quiet revolution, one stitch at a time. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. Dear listeners, I'm curious to know where in the world you're enjoying these tales of courage and romance from the American frontier. Please leave a comment below sharing your location, whether you're listening from a bustling city or a quiet countryside. I'd love to connect with you all. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of passion and perseverance from the untamed territories. Share your thoughts about Eliza and Cole's journey in the comments. What touched your heart the most? Your engagement keeps these stories alive and helps our community grow. Until next time, partners.